Hello, today we're going to go over, among other things, an attack on a woman that had a patch on her wetsuit that was off-colored from her wetsuit, and it appears that's what caused the bite from the shark. We're also going to go over an attack on a diver that he could barely see the shark in his peripheral, which was about 80 feet visibility, and it circled him, slowly closing the circle until it came in slowly for an attack. We're going to go over those two stories along with about 4 others. One small shark thrown in there, and at the end of the show we're going to go over another bite to the head. It's going to be a great show. Stick around. Okay, we'll start out the show over in Papua New Guinea, location we have covered at the end of the show most of the time with some crazy fatalities over there. But today we start the show out, and Dinah Halstead was a diver. She's a diver out there. She likes to dive and hand feed sharks, and she's, you know, a professional diver, and she's been hand feeding these sharks forever. Well, she went ahead and put patches on her wetsuit. She had a couple holes in her wetsuit, and she put white patches on them. You know, black wetsuit with the white patch, and that's all of a sudden going to be that contrast in color. And a lot of the smaller sharks, not the large ones, but a lot of these smaller sharks that go after fish a lot, they're going to mistake that sometimes for a flash of a fish and bite on it. So she's down there hand feeding these sharks now. She's down with her husband. It sounds like there's a cameraman down there, and no telling how far from shore where they're at. They own a live dive boat, so they live in dive boat, and they're in the water. They're hand feeding sharks when suddenly this one silver tip shark comes up and it bites her in the knee, and it ended up, because it got her knee, it ended up lacerating both her calf and her thigh because her leg was bent, so it got both of them in that one bite. The shark quickly let go and turned back to get at Dinah, and she took one of her pieces of gear and stuck it into the shark's mouth. And then by the time the shark came back for a third time, her husband was right next door, and he was able to beat the shark off to defend her on the third attack. And then the shark goes away. She goes in and gets stitched up. Damage, like I said, pretty severe to her thigh and calf from this silver tip shark. She claims that it was a case of, you know, a mistake, which it was, an accident. A lot of bites, I think, all over there at New Smyrna are accidents. I mean, you're out there and you're surfing and playing in the shark's feeding area, so they're looking for fish, and that flash of light from the sun off of the side of a fish probably is like a go for them. And when they see a hand, you know, the light flash off the palm of a hand on a tan body, it'll stand out, and they'll probably think that's a fish too. So I agree with Dinah. This is not an attack. It's basically an accident. So we're not going to mark this down in the stats. We were just going to cover the attack. Okay, now we're going to head over to Kerboom's Lagoon, and that is over in Plattenberg Bay, South Africa. The date, December 19th of 2016. Ben Swart, he is 55 years old. He's out with a friend Ronald and Nick, and they are doing some early morning surf skiing. They're about over 400 yards from shore. They're probably between 400 and 500 yards from shore. It's glassy seas. Ben is in the middle of the other two, so Ronald and Nick are on the outsides, and they're just paddling along when suddenly there's a blast underneath the surf ski of Ben's, right in the center, and at the same time the shark bit down on that, took a huge chunk, just destroyed that bottom of the surf ski, and it sent Ben up in the air. So Ben's up in the air. He says all hell broke loose. He's up in the air. You can see slivers from the plastic that was shattered when it was bitten, and he ends up in the water. Now, I don't think he can see the shark, but he said that he didn't want to swim away and cause the shark to bite him. So he's sitting there right next to his surf ski. About 30 seconds after the attack, Nick Bester can see the great white, so they're a little bit worried that that might come back. Now, Ben has gotten himself back up onto his overturned surf ski, and he's laying on top of it. Now the other two grab onto it with one hand, and they're trying to paddle their way in. They're fighting with this for about 10 minutes. At one point a big wave came in, and Nick ended up dislocating his thumb because it got smashed, probably got smashed into the other surf ski when he was trying to help it along. So for 10 minutes they tried to get it in together, and instead Nick Bester says, I'm going to go in. He paddles in real quick, calls National Sea Rescue, and they send out a boat which picks the three of them up, because now after Nick made the call, he went back out to try to help. They were not able to get that surf ski in, but luckily rescue shows up. They get them on board the boat. There's no injury to Ben, who was the one who got hit by the shark as far as his surf ski. His surf ski is toast. I'll post a link in the description below that has a story. He's got some cool sharks socks on in the lower picture, but you'll be able to see the picture of the surf ski. Really tore that thing up in the center, probably not too far from where he sits as far as where you're located at. And then the only injury is to Ben's thumb when it dislocated when he was trying to help his friend in, and which was impossible to do. Attack, not an attempt to predate. No injury to the victim. Collateral damage, dislocated thumb, and a surf ski that is toast. We'll move on. Okay, now we're going to head over to Leighton Beach, and that is over in Western Australia, and the date is February 16th of 1981. Stephen Fawcett, he is out and he's exercising his dog, so he's just in shallow water, I'm sure, unless they're a little bit deeper and the dog's swimming around. That is possible, but I don't think he's in very deep water at all. And he's sitting there and his dog is playing, and suddenly he's bitten a foot. And he says right after he's bitten, he could see the shark. Turns out to be a little, just over 3 foot hammerhead shark. So we normally don't cover these small shark attacks. Didn't go after the dog, didn't care about the dog that's in the water, went and bit Stephen's foot. He gets himself in, gets fixed up, and he's all set. We normally don't cover a lot of these smaller sharks, but this is one of the hammerheads, and there's only a few dozen on record. So there's one of them, and that's why the hammerhead ranks so low as far as dangerous sharks to me, is that they really are not interested in people. Kind of proven out when the one, almost an accidental attack, a bite ended up happening. In that video clip, we all saw that hammerhead. It was chasing a skate, and it chased him right up near that guy, and then the guy got in, well, that guy got in the way of his food. So I mean, I know a lot of people complain about, hand feeding sharks, about being in cages. Well, here's an incident of a person just being in the water that interfered in a meal. I mean, that skate might have been taken if that guy wasn't standing there in that situation. So it doesn't matter what you're doing in the water. I wouldn't nitpick any of it. If you're in the water, you're in the way. You ain't supposed to be there, and you're interfering with what they're supposed to do. It'd be like a shark coming to your dinner table and just swimming all over the table while you're trying to eat. You don't want that to happen. So that's our story of the little, just over 3 foot hammerhead shark. Okay, now we're going to head over to Twabasons, and that is on the west coast of Reunion Island, and the date is July 23rd of 2012. Alexander Rasiga, he is 22 years old. He is out doing some afternoon surfing. He's 110 yards from shore at 4:30 in the afternoon, and he's attacked. There's not many details I can find on this attack. They get him into shore. He's in cardiac arrest. They go ahead and try to bring him out of cardiac arrest, but he ends up passing away from his wounds. His leg was severed. No telling what kind of shark, so this one is, pick 'em. It's a pick 'em between the big three. Could be the bull, the tiger, or the great white, I would think. I would think a tiger, because they like to take things from people, but we've had plenty of great whites swim up and just take a leg from somebody. So like I said, we don't know what kind of shark or what size. We're going to put this down as an attack, not an attempt to predate, on Alexander Rasiga by an unknown shark. Okay, now we're going to head over to Gulf Island National Seashore Park, and that is in Florida. The date, August 24th, 1981. Ted Best, 19 years old. He is out. He claimed doing some collecting of seashells. Well, he's got a spear gun with him, and he ends up spearing a shark with this. So I don't think that he was actually collecting seashells. I think he was out spearfishing. But anyway, so Ted is out in the water. He's 50 yards from shore. He's in 12 feet deep water. He dives down, and he can see a couple sharks down there. He says that he saw a shell down there that he wanted to collect. So he goes down there and he gets the shell, and he goes up to the top, and all of a sudden he goes down and submerges again, and there is a mako right on him. He thinks it's a mako that's right on him, but there's a shark that's right on him, and he takes the spear and he shoots the shark. So he takes the spear out of the shark, and when he does that, the shark turns and bites him in the leg, and now Nick ends up swimming his way back to shore, and he's got the shark following him in, and when he's in about 7 feet of water, he says he could see the dark shape of a shark out just past his visibility, and then it just went away. So the shark followed him into the shallows and then disappeared. He ends up with bites to his leg. He says that he thinks that it was a mako shark, and he thinks that it was about 6 feet long, but I think this is a provoked incident as far as he shot that shark. You know, I don't think you're going to be out with the spear gun out there collecting seashells, but you might. I mean, I don't know. I'd want, you know, an Army division around. Well, I guess the SEAL division around me if I'm going to be doing that. Because, you know, if I'm going to deal with a land shark, then I want the Army. So that's our attack on Ted Best. We're not going to cover this one. We're not sure that it's a 6-foot shark. The word about when I see 5 to 6 foot shark, it doesn't enter the stats. When I see about a 6-foot shark, it's not going to go into the stats. It pretty much has to be, you know, a 6 to 8 foot shark, or this was a 6-foot shark. And a lot of these, they end up being 5, 6 foot sharks. And even the ones that are going to end up in the show, I got some finally from New Smyrna Beach. Those are smaller sharks. I mean, they're 6-foot sharks, but it's like black tips and spinners, which don't really have the capability or the want to go ahead and try to eat a person. Let's put it that way. So that's our story of Ted Best. He shoots a shark. The shark follows him in. We've had this with spear fishermen before where these sharks follow him in, but he ended up with 100 puncture wounds in his leg. So whatever shark it was, whether it was, you know, 100 puncture wounds makes me think either like a nurse shark, a gray nurse shark, which maybe if you see the teeth, you can confuse that with the bottom teeth on a mako shark, because they do have the similar pointy teeth on the bottom, and then they have the knives on the top. So that's our story of Ted Best. We'll move on. Okay, we're going to head over to Broomfield Island, and that is Broomfield Reef. That's in the Great Barrier Reef, which is Queensland, Australia, and the date, September 27th. 1966, Barry Dawson, he is with a friend. They were doing some skin diving. They entered into the water, 55-foot deep water. It's about 4:30 in the afternoon, and Barry's friend is in a different area. Barry is down about 50 feet deep when he notices that there's a cone shell on the seafloor. He swims down to get the cone shell. When he gets to it, he notices there's 80 foot of visibility. Right at the edge of 80-foot visibility, you can see a shark swimming, doing a wide circle. So he surfaces to get some more air, and then he goes to dive back down. Now, he must have went back down to the bottom. I'm thinking he saw another shell. He does have a spear gun in his hand, so maybe these shell collectors actually take something for defense with them. He goes down, and I don't know if he's getting a shell again, but now he sees a shark, and it's 30 feet away doing this wide circle. Well, 50 feet away. Shortly after that, it's 30 feet doing the circling, and after it's doing the circling at 30 feet, it makes a slow approach onto him. Now, he's still at 50 feet when this shark is slowly coming up on him. Just the way sharks normally swim, it's not swimming fast, not swimming slow. There's a 7-foot bronze whaler now coming at him. The shark comes at him, and as soon as it gets there, it goes to bite, and he sticks his spear gun in the shark's mouth, and the shark bites the spear gun. So Barry lets go of the spear gun, and probably the shell too, and he slowly starts swimming himself backwards, paying attention to the shark, watching the shark chew on the spear gun, going crazy with it, actually, he said. And he says this was a very agitated shark. He went to the surface, and he got about 12 feet from the surface, and he could see that the shark now spotted him and made a beeline for him, came straight up at him. He says he put his arms into his body so that he wouldn't lose an arm to this bronze whaler. It came up and kind of just came right up his body, across his body, so it's kind of laying across his body, and it's got his shoulder in his mouth. Bit him in the shoulder, so the shark's right next to his head. And then the shark shakes twice and disappears. Barry reaches up, and he feels a hole in this wetsuit, and he can feel loose tissue, and then he feels up to his face to see if there's any problem with his face, and nothing there, so he figured it wasn't too bad. He surfaces, they get him up on the boat. When he's on the boat, he sees that the patch that was torn from his shoulder out of his suit was floating around, and he grabbed that patch out of the water and used it to sew back into his suit later on. So Barry goes in, he gets wounds to his shoulder, but not terrible. But he says he was looking right in the shark's eyes. Sharks got him, and they're looking eye to eye as it's got, ooh. So the 7-foot bronze whaler bit him, released, swam off. He goes in, gets fixed up. It's an attack, not an attempt to predate, by a 7-foot bronze whaler. You know, we're going to finish out our unprovoked attacks over at the Hallelulah Lighthouse, which is in Hawaii, and the date is October 31st of 2014. McKenzie Clark, she is 34 years old. Her and her friend Brian, they are out doing some late morning surfing. This attack happens before 11:12 when the authorities were notified, so probably shortly before then. I would think around 11 o'clock, maybe a little bit prior. So it's around 11 o'clock, and McKenzie is sitting about 150 yards offshore in 10 feet deep water, and her friend Brian is about 20 yards away. He's not paying attention to her. They're probably looking for waves, and all of a sudden he hears McKenzie scream. Now McKenzie, on her board, all she knows is she felt like she hit a rock, and she didn't know what it was at first, and then obviously it sounds like the board got stuck on the shark's back, because when Brian was able to turn after hearing her scream, he saw her board lifted up in the air a little bit, and it was being pushed along the water. And so obviously I'm thinking it's on the shark's back. The shark is swimming. She's on top of the board, kneeling and hanging on. The shark eventually, Brian is now making his way over. The shark disappears under the water, swims a little bit away, and comes back. Brian, as he's paddling over, says that he saw the shark take 3 lunges at McKenzie unsuccessfully, and then it finally bit the board. Well, when it bit the board, it bit her hand. She's hanging on to the sides of the board, kneeling on top of it, I'm sure, and it bit down on the board and her hand and pulled her into the water. Now, Brian's almost there. Brian says when he gets there, he sees her take her hand out of the shark's mouth, and the shark grabs the board, bites the board, and then starts swimming. Now, she's attached by the leash, so she's being dragged a little bit, and the shark finally stops, releases the board, and as it releases the board, Brian is finally there. He says right when it released the board and was going to turn its attention back to McKenzie, he was able to grab onto the dorsal fin and punch that shark, and he says after about 5 punches, it turned its attention away from her and it left. So she ends up going in, she ends up with 20 stitches in her fingers. She doesn't lose her fingers. They said this was a 12-foot tiger shark that got a hold of that board and started pushing her, it sounds like, out to sea. I don't know which direction she was being pushed when it was lodged on it, but that shark was headed back out to sea when it had the board in its mouth, and it was heading out. So she was being dragged out into deeper waters, and Brian was trying to catch up to her at the time. So it's an attack. It's not an attempt to predate. 12-foot tiger shark, and just a crazy story of a ride you don't want to take. That's our regular show, and we'll get on with the end of the show next. Okay, we'll finish out the show with You Don't Hear That Every Day. Back in 1984 at the Steinhardt Aquarium. Is that Steinhardt? Yeah, Steinhardt Aquarium in 1984. Don Reed, he was a diver with sharks. He had been diving. He says he's done like 6,000 dives. This is in an aquarium tank. He's done about 6,000 dives. He says 2,000 of those with sharks. And, you know, he says it's diving with them that much, you kind of forget that they're sharks and they can bite you, you know, type thing. Well, he gets into this one tank this one day. He says you can swim with them 2,000 days, but there's that 2001st time, and that could be the problem. He's in the tank, and all of a sudden there's a Sevengill shark in there with him, and it grabs his head. It bites him in the head and releases him, and he reaches up and he can see blood, so he turns and he punched a shark. And the thing about this is he felt really bad about punching a shark afterwards, because he realized that the shark was just doing what sharks do, and it bit him in the head. Now these Sevengills, man, that's just like the third one that's bit somebody in the head, at least the third one we've gone through. So we finally of one thing that we've nailed down is what shark really likes to go after the head, and that's the Sevengill shark. The good thing is it doesn't seem to have any powerful jaws to where those bottom teeth can dig into you. This is our third or fourth attack by a Sevengill at least, and we have yet to get past anything that's really been harmful to a person by it. So they don't seem much more dangerous to a person than a tawny nurse shark. So just by that, I don't know what their bite force is or what they eat or how they eat. I know those upper teeth don't look very bad. They're basically for holding, gripping onto a fish, and those bottom ones come in and they got those little serrations that are off to the side and they're on an angle, and they probably kind of tear at it that way, but I don't think the jaws are very powerful. I don't know though, I'm not an expert in that. So that's our story of Don Reed. He gets bit in the head. He doesn't need any stitches or anything like that. He just ended up with some bleeding in his head and was angered that the shark went ahead and bit him. So you don't hear about that every day, but you know, we've gone over these aquarium attacks, whether it be in a mall and some little 8-year-old, 6-year-old girl sticks her finger in there and is bitten, or this attack here, or just any of the ones we go through. Still the craziest one, you can Google it, is there's kids that are, you know, it's like a zoo or whatever, and kids are there and they're watching the hammerhead shark. It's a hammerhead shark, and there's skates rays in there with it, and the hammerhead shark just turns as it swims by the ray and grabs the ray by the edge of the outer edge of the wing and just slowly is eating it. So it's slowly consuming this thing. I feel real bad for the ray because it's just sitting there like, what am I going to do? I'm just being eaten. So that's our story of Don Reed. That's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to bring up Michael Joseph, I believe his name is, this excellent Neptunic shark suit shirt that he had sent me. Thank you very much for the shirt. I had, you know, those chainmail suits. Those are interesting, the fact that you were able to cut half the weight out of those things. I did kind of look at those when I looked at Neptunic suits, when I was looking into suits that they're developing with nanotechnology to try to be able to keep surfers and people in the water safe from these sharks. I mean, if you're going to go in the water, you're going to be around sharks, and you're going to need something. So it's good that there's people out there that are trying to develop something that's going to keep more people with their limbs and more people from, you know, turning into a fatality when, especially with surfers, the shark isn't interested in eating you and it doesn't really want to kill you. It just wants you out of its area. This is what I'm thinking. So thank you very much for the shirt. Other than that, the only other thing is that I'll have both of the stores open. I'll put that down in the description. I'll put the story that has the picture of that surf ski that just, the bottom of it is just gone in the one section where that shark took care of it. And other than that, I'll be back in a few days. I hope you join me. I hope you enjoyed the show. But remember, if you go into that water, you are much more afraid of these sharks than they are of you.